So I thought maybe I should present myself, but he has done so very nicely. So maybe just to say of what kind of projects I'm doing. So I'm leading a work package in a large European project called Internet of Food and Farm, IOF 2020. And I have a somewhat smaller role in smart agri-hubs and also in agrobo-food and some other innovation programs. So in all of these projects, what we do is that we think actually about these technologies and what kind of societal and ethical impacts they might have. And our purpose is to actually reflect with the different stakeholders about these things. So my background is in responsible research and innovation as well as in ethics. And before I worked in a healthcare context on genomics, and so quite different, but also focusing to some extent on data, and now in agri-food since almost 3 years now. Yeah, so I thought, well, I don't know you, you don't know me. So I thought maybe we can introduce ourselves a little bit via Mentimeter. So I'd like you to go to www.menti.com and use this code. And at several times during my talk, I'm going to ask you to answer some questions. So this is the idea, to make it a little bit more interactive. So if you could, okay, people already started, that's wonderful. So I can see a little bit who I have in front of me, and that's really nice. So I see some ethicists, a policymaker also. And tech researcher, developer, tech company, also companies, yeah. IOF 2020, we have a lot of companies involved actually. I believe BOKU is also one of the partners there. And so there the interaction is a lot with the industry and less with researchers, but also with policymakers and with farmers representatives. I'm not sure if I put them there as well, farmers. Perhaps they're also in the audience, but I'm not sure. Do you know, Andreas, if there will be farmers involved or farmer representatives? He's muted.
No, I'm afraid there's no farmers today, as far as I saw from the registrations.
Okay, well, thank you, Laurent. Quite a lot of students there as well. Well, it's nice to have a look a little bit at the kind of audience we have here. So there are very little social scientists and ethicists I see, which is interesting for a platform on ethics. I thought there would be more, but I see you are servicing a different kind of public, which is also very good. And that's what I do a lot too. So, well, this stopped a little bit. Perhaps some people don't have their phone in their hands. So, well, really great. And to see that there are a lot of livestock researchers. I have a second question now. So maybe you could add that one too. So I'm moving to the next slide. Why doesn't it work? I cannot move to the next.
Simone, we see the not the presentation, just the PowerPoint, but not the full screen version of the PowerPoint.
Okay, and you don't see this anymore, the Mentimeter?
No.
Oh, strange. That's very strange. I wanted to make. And now?
Still only PowerPoint.
Yeah, we can see the PowerPoint, but we can see in the Mentimeter the next slide. So what makes research and innovation responsible according to you?
Yeah, that was the second question I wanted to ask.
Yeah, the second question is online, but it's not on screen.
Ah.
So maybe if you want to, you shared your presentation, but you could also share your screen.
Yeah, you are screen sharing, it says.
Yeah.
Oh, well. Well, maybe I move to my presentation then. And we skip this part. It's strange that it didn't work. But, okay, can you see my screen again?
Yeah, we can see your screen, and we can see program there.
Yeah. So I thought I divide my lecture into two parts. So the first part is about responsible research and innovation. And the second part is more about ethical and societal aspects of digital farming. And Lawrence asked me to focus especially on devices, on actual artifacts and how they matter ethically. So I start now with the first part on responsible research and innovation. And there I want to say that actually responsible research and innovation is sort of starting a discussion about a traditional science-society relationship. So this relationship actually has a kind of background. It starts from the idea that science and innovation actually brings only good things. So it is a cornucopian view of science and technology. So here you see this woman with the horn, and out of this horn, only good things come. And this is a kind of metaphor for how we see science and technology. Only good things come out. And so it enhances health and welfare, it fosters economic growth, it strengthens our market position and offers solutions to problems. So that's often our starting point about how we think about what science and technology offers. And it's the basis of the relationship between science and society. So here you see a few examples of policy documents. And there you see that this is not only a traditional view of science and society, but it's also very actual. So you see here a document from FAO, and it says at the end of this, this quote, so it discusses digital farming, right? It says, innovative approaches, including information and communication technologies, are needed across the agricultural sector to increase productivity, conserve natural resources, and use inputs sustainably and efficiently. So you see that ICT is expected to play this role to help us make agriculture more sustainable. And here you see some other examples. So the first one is from the World Bank. And there it says, precision agriculture is part of the solution to feeding a population that is growing faster than available land supply, while also ensuring the sustainable use of water and energy. And you see the last here from the OECD. It says digital technologies can help optimize crop growth and yields. Oh, that one is from the World Bank. And optimize the utilization of natural resources and optimize use of nutrients. So you see here that a lot of positive things are expected from these digital technologies, digital farming technologies. And that fits very well with this general idea of positive things that come out of science and society. So this story supports the traditional relationship that we presuppose very often. And the idea behind this relationship is that scientists receive money and have a freedom to pursue their own projects. So they can set up their own projects, and the citizens just give money to do that. And the scientists serve society by means of publications, teaching, and discovering knowledge, which would eventually lead to products and technologies that serve everyone. But this relationship will only continue when science actually delivers only good things. So if society believes that science is going to offer only good things, then it's willing to pay for these projects that scientists think of themselves and pursue for themselves. Well, of course, stories have a kind of function, right? So you could say, is this a true story? But you could also say, what function does this story have in the way we pursue science? So so narratives do lots of things for us. They put order in experiences and events by showing relationships between them. And so we order events in time, for example. It gives single events meaning in relationship to others that preceded it or follow it in time. It might suggest alternative options for the future, which offer orientation for actions in the present. But stories are also shared with a group of listeners who are therewith invited to tell the same story or to take action or to invest to realize the future it anticipates. So a lot of these stories about the good things that science brings are also meant to put digital farming on the research agenda, to attract investors and to seek collaborators in your team. And if you tell a very positive story, then this is what happens. Well, in responsible research and innovation, it's not only, well, we're not specifically critical about all these positive stories. They might very well be true, but we also look at them with some distance. So we look a little bit like, what stories do we actually tell about the societal future of digital farming, right? What are they actually, and by whom are they told? And this is interesting, of course, because the stories of policymakers might not be the same as the stories from that the developers of these technologies tell, or that the farmers will tell, or the citizens. These stories might differ very much. And you might ask, to whom are these stories told? Who is the audience? And why? With what purpose are they told? So here again, it's important that if a story is told by scientists, the purpose might be to attract research money, to find people to collaborate with. So it's important to know who tells the story to whom and what the purpose is. Well, stories about innovation usually tell a positive story. So usually the story is told by scientists and innovators, and the story often has a linear structure. So it narrates about a scientific finding. So this is the beginning then of the innovation, and which is developed into an applicable innovation, so a technology which will eventually benefit society. And society figures as the recipient of the story as well as of the goods that science and innovation offer. So you see here a poster of the Chicago World Fair from 1933. And it has a wonderful motto that illustrates this linear developmental perspective. Science finds, industry applies, and man conforms. So you see that citizens have the role only to conform to innovation. Well, this classic story that kind of illustrates the science-society relationships as it has been in the past, but you still see it a lot at present. This has been discussed quite a bit by science, by responsible research and innovation scholars. So questions that are asked, for example, is the science and innovation process linear? So does it really start with science and then you develop an application and then society has to start using it? Because very often science does not really produce the future in such a linear fashion. So there are lots of puzzles, there are feedback loops, there are unexpected results. So very often, a scientific finding never makes it up to a technology, or the technology has been tried out a few times and then goes back to the laboratory in order to improve it a little better. So and sometimes technologies are produced to fulfill a certain role, and then they fulfill quite a different role in our society. So technologies may be used in unexpected ways as well. So it's difficult actually to see this story as a linear story. It has several loops, and sometimes it doesn't even make it to contexts of use. And the other part of it is that you might ask, is the end product always valued? So here are a few examples. So since the Second World War, there has been a lot more discussion about the value of science and innovation. And the question that is often asked is, does science and innovation only bring goods? And the start of that more critical discussion was the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because the scientists who produced that said, we have been involved only with science, and the way our findings are being used is not our affair. That's the responsibility of someone else. And a lot of the people didn't buy that story, because they said, well, the scientists are actually at least co-responsible, because they did eventually develop that bomb. So they could be co-responsible for the way it was used. Well, in a similar fashion, there were lots of discussions about different innovation, and these are just a few examples. So the Cochlear Implant, which was supposed to make the deaf hear again, that generated a lot of discussion, especially among the deaf community in the United States, because this deaf community also had a very strong culture. So they have their own universities, their own communities, their own sport clubs, etc. And they said, well, you know, we're not really impaired. We're not lesser people than the hearing people, because we function perfectly well. It's just that we cannot hear, but not hearing is not a problem for us as long as we stay in our community. So when you come with a cochlear implant, we start to hear, but we hear less well than the hearing people. So we feel more impaired to participate as less people with less capacity to hear in a hearing community than we do when we stay in our deaf community. So there was actually a lot of discussion about that, which there's a wonderful documentary about that, Sound and Fury, which tells the story of a deaf child who asks for a cochlear implant to her parents, which generates a lot of upheavals in the whole community, because yeah, they feel they're going to lose her if she takes an implant. They're losing her out of the community. So that nicely illustrates this this discussion. Well, of course, there are lots of discussions also about GM foods, genetically modified foods, but also about women getting pregnant who are 60 plus, so quite old. So, so a lot of these innovations, people say, are these really good innovation? Are these really making our society better, our human lives better? Or is that not the case? So it's not really saying that these are bad innovation, but at least it shows that it's ambiguous, that there's a possibility to disagree about the value of these innovations. So what this is doing is it's discussing the traditional science and society relationship, this science and society relationship in which the society gave money to science to pursue their own goals, because now society is saying, hey, we want to have a say too. We want to say what science should be researching. So society no longer writes a blank check, but wants returns for investment. So economic returns maybe, yeah? So it wants science to lead to business and to earn money. And it becomes skeptical about the benefits that science produces. So science is no longer regarded as cornucopian. There's more attention for hazards, for risks, for disagreement about value. Yeah, so society wants to have a say in where science and technology go. And this leads to a request to participate in science. And it is the start for responsible research and innovation. So here you see a picture of René van Schomburg, and he is a policymaker at the European level. And he is one of the people who started out defining what responsible research and innovation means. So he defines it as a transparent, interactive process by which societal actors and innovators become mutually responsive to each other, with a view on the ethical acceptability, sustainability, and societal desirability of the innovation process in its marketable products, in order to allow proper embedding of scientific and technological advances in our society. So you see, I made this red. Societal actors and innovators become mutually responsive to each other. So they need to talk together in order to align their values and their needs. And this is actually key to what responsible research and innovation is. So what responsibility is actually seeking this alignment between the scientists, the innovators, and society, and so that they speak more together. Well, there are, of course, different perspectives to responsible research and innovation. So I don't want to say that this is only the perspective of a European policymaker. This is just to give you an idea of the diversity of views that is there. So René van Schomberg, he is a policymaker, so he rejects the collective view of the good life to guide European research and innovation. And the good life means that you tell people how to live, actually. And for example, telling them how to make choices in their private life, about with whom to get married, or what religious community to be part of, or what to vote, you know. So as a policymaker, you need to refrain from doing that. And you take a more distance perspective. So he relies on the EU normative framework, and he focuses on rights, on human rights, as the basic norms to start from. And he says we should focus on the product when we do responsible research and innovation, and we need to attend to the challenges of society. But there are these other illustrious men, Richard Owen, Phil McNaughton, and Jack Stilgoe, who says, no, we cannot be silent about the good life, because when we make technology, we actually make quite fundamental choices about how we're living our lives. So they say RI demands stewardship of the world and how we deliver it to the next generation. And they focus also on the process of innovation, as well as the product. And they say we need more substantive reflection about the value of purposes, the purposes that we're pursuing with science and also with innovation. So for what futures do we want to prevent, and which ones do we want to realize? So they don't keep silent actually about the good life, because they say, well, actually, when we create these new technologies, we're telling people, sometimes we're steering them in directions in their private lives as well. So this is going to be substantiated a little bit further in the second half of this talk. But for now, I would like to say that, well, there are lots of principles figuring as candidates for leading responsible research and innovation research. But in general, at least there are these 4 very key elements. So they're called the AIR principles, and they stem from the work from Owen, McNaughton, and Stilgoe. And they say central elements are to anticipate the future. So while we're making innovation, we should anticipate what the societal impacts can be. So we should explore them and describe the impacts that are being produced for human social life in order to be more aware of what we're making and what the value could be. So we need to reflect on those impacts, and we need to reflect on our motivation to make these innovations. So we need to look at the often positive story that underlies innovation. So what are its presuppositions? Can they reasonably be expected to materialize in reality? And are there also other motivations behind the development of technology? And these motivations, do they always match, or might they be conflicting as well? So, so we look critically at the background story of these technologies. We engage in deliberative dialogue or debate. So responsible research and innovation always says that innovation actually should be inclusive. So you should enhance dialogue to find out what other stakeholders think about it. What are their stories about innovation? And they seek for responsiveness. So they invite scientists and innovators to pay attention to the preferences of other stakeholders and attend to their views and values. So these four elements are very important in this type of research. Yeah, I think I'll skip this because it didn't work so well. I'm sorry. So the next part of the talk is about the ethical and societal aspects of digital farming. So I know you're mostly interested in livestock farming, so I've been trying to focus a little bit on examples that relate to that. But I'm currently involved in a case study on a livestock farming tool that is being developed, but this is not finished yet. So yeah. So I think in general, and that you can read in my article that is being, our article that is being shared, and that is published a year ago, and it was actually a kind of review of all of the literature that is appearing about ethics and society aspects of digital farming. And there we teased out different topics. So there are a lot of the questions circle around data sharing and accessibility and control of these data. They circle around fairness of distribution of benefits harvested from data. Yeah, and related to that is the redistribution of power in the network around farms, because if you start sharing data with large companies, then these companies might get power over you. So, so this is also being discussed a lot. Yeah, I think, well, at the very end, I have a list of references, and we've been doing a lot of work actually on data sharing. Also, a lot of focus groups with people, with tech developers, farmers, and researchers in IOF 2020, as well as in Smart Agri Hubs. So I'd gladly refer to those publications for these first topics, but for now I would like to focus on these expected impacts on human and animal life and well-being. So that's what my talk the second half of my talk will focus on. And if we go into that, it's probably important to say something about what the relationship is between technology and human social or moral life. So these men form the background of this thinking, and some of them are Dutch. So Hans Achterhuis used to be a full professor in philosophy of technology in Twente University in the Netherlands. And one of his students is Peter Paul Verbeek, who is at present one of the full professors there, and Tjalling Zwierstra, and all of them have been thinking about how technology is actually organizing our lives, how it impacts on our actions, our ways to interact, our the way we perceive the world around us, including animals, plants, and other human beings. And they actually synthesize the philosophies of Don Eide, who is a phenomenologist and who studied a lot of the technologies and how they change our perception of the world and our way of experiencing the things around us. And the philosophy by Bruno Latour, who focused more on the relationship of technology and how it organizes, reorganizes and steers our action and interaction. So Don Eide and Bruno Latour were great influencers of this, yeah, more probably, well, the Dutch philosophers are quite strong in this philosophy of technology and in thinking about how, how this technology influences human social life. So Hans Achterhuis, Tjalling Zwierstra, and Peter Paul Verbeek are quite interesting for that, and I can recommend their work to you if you don't know them already. So, and the background of this is also a view of what morality and ethics is. So morality is considered to be then part of social life. Not all ethicists start from that background, but the idea is then that it generates in a history of interaction between people, and it tells what is good and desirable and acceptable or approved of or forbidden. And we all live with such morality. So, and sometimes we make it explicit in rules or principles, but most of the time it stays tacit in expectations, emotional reactions, and habits. So sometimes when we are angry with each other, then in the background of our emotional reactions, there are some values. And when you start explaining why you're angry, then you will explain what your value is that has been transgressed or disrespected. Well, a lot of the time this all works perfectly well, and we're not even aware of the morality that plays a role in our lives. But sometimes we need to think more deeply about this morality. And that is in situations when there's disagreement about the values that apply, or a conflict, for example, or when new technologies come about that bring forward different questions that you haven't been asking before. So in these circumstances, you need ethics, which is a systematic reflection about morality. And it usually helps to evaluate different values with regard to each other and to come up with a prioritization of some values over others, or a justification for what you're doing. So so what we're looking at now is how technology influences morality to begin with, and what type of ethical questions then might come up as a result of that. So one of the things that these philosophers often bring forward as an example is how technology can influence human action. So they can do that in different ways. So here you see a key with a lid attached to it. And well, in former times you saw it in hotels. And this lid is attached to it to move you to leave the key at the reception when you leave. So when you put it in your pocket, you will feel it. And you will be nudged to leave it at the reception. You will be reminded by this lid, right? So this lid is actually moving you to do something, but there's a possibility to ignore what this lid is telling you to do, because you can also put the key in your bag, for example, and then you take it with you anyway. So it leaves you some freedom to choose the key with the lid. On the right-hand side, you see a toilet. And I don't know what the toilets are like in your university, but in mine, when you come in, the light turns on. And when you go out, the light turns off. So you don't need to put a note on the door saying, please turn off the light, because it's doing it for you. So actually, this sensor acts for you and doesn't leave you any freedom of choice. And you could say that this sensor, we have delegated part of our morality to the sensor, because now we don't have to discipline the people anymore to shut off the light, to turn off the light, but the sensor is doing it for us. Well, so in this situation, the technology actually steers people's choices. There's little freedom to choose to ignore turning off the light. It's doing it for you. Well, when you look at digital farming technologies, you could ask, what influence does it actually have on the autonomy of people? So you might realize these technologies in different ways. You might offer extra information to a farmer and foster his or her autonomy. So in that sense, you are informing the farmer, and the farmer still has all the liberty to choose that there is. So you're actually empowering him to make his own choice, or her own choice, of course. But it might also give you a limited set of set of options to choose from. So it might also steer the farmer slightly towards making certain choices. So it might limit the menu of options, or it might say quite bluntly, option A is the best option to choose, and it's better than choosing B or C. So you might ask about the different devices that you have in front of you. How much freedom does it actually leave farmers to choose? And what is behind, what motivations might be behind it if the choice of a farmer is actually steered into a certain direction. So you might think it's probably a company who makes this device, who is steering the farmer in a certain direction. And you might ask, is there probably an interest behind it of this company to steer the farmer's choices? Or it might also be that there are actually very good reasons to steer farmers' choices. So for example, if we want to lower the burden of farming on the environment, you might say, oh, this might actually be a very good reason to steer farmers' choices in the direction of lowering the burden of farming on the environment, of making the cleaner choices, you see? So it might be interesting to see in cases where farmers' choices are being steered, who steers them and with what purposes in mind? Are they societal purposes? Are they interests of a company, or are there other reasons? So it gives us a critical perspective on these devices. Well, this is an example that I came across. So we've been working with some technology developers who wanted to make a digital breeding system. So that means that if you have a cow and you're considering to give her calves to impregnate her, and you can choose from various options of seed providers, you might think, well, what are the parameters to choose the seed provider from? So the technology developer said, well, probably we should focus on resistance to disease and on productivity of the father. But when you talk to different farmers, then they think, they would like to include different parameters to choose from. So a biological farmer, for example, says he would like to select what he calls maternal characteristics. So he said, I would prefer a very quiet bull because he also chooses the cows that have preferable maternal characteristics, and he means that once the calves are born, that this cow is very quiet and is feeding the calves very well, and so this is what he prefers. And he wants to have a bull that is also behaving quite quietly, so that these maternal characteristics might be strengthened, and in that way the calves will have a higher survival rate. But another farmer wants to focus on taste. So he says, I want to breed with a focus on taste. And another one says, I want to have a perfect race in my cows. So he has Lakenfelders. I don't know if you're familiar with those. And they have this perfect white collar over their back, a kind of sheet, and it's supposed to be without any spots in it. It should be perfectly white, and he wants it perfectly white. So he wants to choose a bull based on that. So these might be very different criteria to add to such a breeding system. So you might think, well, who should you talk to if you develop such a breeding system, and who should influence on what the options are that are chosen there? Well, here are examples of robots. So there's the manure scraper and bell pepper picking robot. And here you could ask, what influence does it have on human interaction and interaction with other sentient beings, such as cows in a stable? So there are lots of discussions around that, like what new skills are expected of human beings, and what kind of routines, for example, in a greenhouse, and can every farm adopt them? So, for example, these greenhouses that have these bell pepper pickers, these robots, they're usually very large, and it's not available for the smaller greenhouses. So what does the availability of these robots do to the survival of these different variants of farms? But also, what does it mean for the well-being of the animal and the human laborer? So the manure scraper might bump into cows and hurt them, for example, there has to be also a perfect match with the floor of the barn, because sometimes it's just, this robot is very clean, but I've seen it working in some stables, and it's a terrible mess. It moves around all the manure, and it doesn't bring it anywhere. So it's not always equally effective, let's say. And this could infect the feet or the claws of the cows, and which is a health problem, actually. So maybe there should also be a good interaction with the environment of the floor of the barn, the floor of the stable, and the use of the robot. And the other robot in the greenhouse, you see here a very narrow alley. So they do that because the robots can go in very easily, but you might imagine that this is not very nice for the human beings that work side by side with this robot. So they have to squeeze themselves through these plants as well. And you might ask, is this a very agreeable work environment? Is it healthy and safe for the laborers? What skills do they need? What are the risks and harms for them? And what are the effects, of course, on the job market? Because these robots are taking over human jobs. And you might ask, are low-skilled laborers robbed of their opportunity to provide for themselves? And in the Netherlands, this is largely an affair of labor migrants. So there are people coming first from Poland, and now I believe from Moldavia. And these people are doing work for us, and now we're saying, okay, we're replacing you. So this, you might ask, there are some justice questions or fairness questions to be asked about that. Changing perception and experience. So if you look at animal health with the help of senses, for example, what do you see? So with senses that you attach to animals, one of the discussions around that is what do you consider welfare of animals then to be? It's based on numbers rather than feeling and craftsmanship. So a lot of the farmers bring forward, this cannot really tell us anything about the well-being of our animals, because we want to actually see this animal, and when you see him, then you know whether it's actually serious or not, and whether you have to attend to the health or not. So the question there is, do numbers actually tell all there is to know? And also, and this is what a lot of the farmers bring forward, can data also be misused, for example, by animal activists or controlling bodies of the government? And they say, well, we need to be able to tell a story around these data, because the data never tell the full story. We need to be able, if we have a larger number of animals that get ill, we need to be able to say or to tell something about the causes of that, because we probably have causes, and there's probably more to tell than what the numbers say. Okay, and I'm almost at the end, really. So, and the last slide is about, is this changing also the view of the good life? So, yeah, how can we understand the value or the meaning of such changes? So here I have a few pictures just to give you an idea of what we're thinking of here. So, yeah, on the one side, you might say these technologies might be liberating us from heavy physical labor. Huh? If you look at these greenhouses, for example, you might say this is quite heavy work, and yeah, it's liberating people from it. And it's not very attractive work. A lot of the Dutch unemployed people don't want to do it, so the people come all the way from Moldavia to do it for us. And if you see the right-hand side, there you see a perception of the future where you have rotating plant beds that go past a robot, and a robot picks the fruits from these plants. So you don't, it's completely, yeah, without human beings. And that's an idea about the future, right? So you see on the one hand side, the people talking together nicely, very socially, and on the other hand, you see a highly efficient system, which also has a lot of advantages. It's cheap, it produces more food for less money, but yeah, you might also think, well, what skills are used, are needed from human beings? Yeah, and the people who continue to work there, are they also working under increasing performance pressure? So, okay, so RI invites then to look at how technology changes lots of aspects, our options for action and interaction, what people feel responsible to do, skills, routines, and habits that people develop, what people experience and perceive in the world around them, what they see as good, desirable behavior, and their view of the good life worth striving for. And this might raise a lot of ethical questions, which deal with yeah, conflicting values, or yeah, ideas about what are the best goals to pursue. So about farmers' autonomy, about how we deal with animals and their welfare, what changes we expect in the division of labor and how we should evaluate those changes. Yeah, what types of farms it supports best, and what diversity we want to maintain in these availability of farms and in the ways in which food is produced. And it leads to new relationships and new dependencies between organizations and people. And what is the best way then to deal with that? So I had Mentimeter about that as well. We can give it a try, but maybe we should stop for now. So I have added some references on part 1 and part 2 if you're interested. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention.